Tax time may still be months away, but as we tell you every year around this time, now is when you should be thinking about your 1997 tax return, because there are some things you can do before the end of the year that will save you money. And there are some new laws, as there seem to be every year, that you should know about to help you out. So Gary Belsky of Money Magazine is here with this morning's edition of The Buck Starts Here with some ways to save on taxes. Good to have you here.
Good to be here.
New laws, as I say, every year. Run us through the most important that people ought to know about.
You know, they're supposed to be making this less complicated. Right now, the tax code is about as simple as advanced calculus. Anyway, the things to remember to begin with is, for the first year, 1997, non-working spouses were allowed to contribute up to $2,000 to an IRA of their own, even if they didn't work. The catch is, it may or may not be deductible, depending on whether or not the spouse who's working is eligible to make deductible contributions.
And that means there's an income limit.
There's an income limit. There may be no income, there's an income limit, and there's also a limit depending on whether or not the spouse who's working has a qualified retirement plan at work, like a 401k or a 403b. So that's one issue. Capital gains, everybody heard about the lower capital gains rates. That's true. From as high as 28% to 20% for people in the high tax bracket. People in the lower tax bracket, it's now gone from 15% to 10%. However, in order to qualify for those lower capital gains, you have to own the stock for the long term. In that case, long term now means 18 months, not 12 months. So if people sell the stock in December, or even a house, whatever, like a lot of people do, they have to make sure that they've owned it for 18 months at least. Otherwise, they'll pay the old high rates on capital gains.
And I'm thinking back, but in this case also with capital gains, doesn't just affect sales of capital gains that came late in the year?
No. Okay,
no, all year?
Well, no, it's the new law affects anything done after May 6th. If it's from May 6th to, I think, July 27th, then you sold it, you only owned it for 12 months, then you will get the long-term capital gains rate. But if you sold it after basically July 27th, 28th, all the way through the end of the year, you have to own it 18 months, otherwise you don't get the new rate.
Held it for 18 months.
Right.
Okay. So what things should they should be aware of the new laws?
They should be aware of the new laws. And they have to remember some perennial stuff that always happens. One is you have to make sure that you pay your mortgage payment for January in the last part of this year. In other words, get the interest deduction for the first month of 1998, pay it in the latter parts of 1997, you get the interest deduction.
Write the check on December 31st and you're okay.
Exactly. You want to bunch your medical expenses. In other words, you want to make sure that if you have, in order to qualify to deduct medical expenses, you have to have at least 7.5% of your income be for medical expenses. So if you're close to that limit, or you're close to that level, you may want to do things that you're going to do electively in 1998. Do them early. I don't mean go out and get an appendectomy. I mean buy eyeglasses or get a knee brace or get dental work done that you might wait till next year. Do it now.
But that's just if your medical expenses are on that sort of near that threshold of 7.5% of
Exactly. Right. If they're near it, but you're not going to make it otherwise, you might want to do it. So therefore, at least you can deduct them this year, because you won't be able to deduct them next year again unless you get to the 7.5%. People also want to pay state and local taxes that they think they're going to have to pay in 1998, either for 1997 or for next year. In other words, you're going to have to pay extra state taxes, say, on your state return. Pay them this year, because then you can deduct it on your 1997 return. And finally, I always like to say this last because it's a good deed and you get money for it. Give to charity, not necessarily even money, but property. If you make donations to a nonprofit qualified charity, you can take those deductions on your tax return and lower your income and therefore lower your taxes.
Makes you feel better about putting a little extra in the Salvation Army kettle.
Exactly, because you get something for it and it's good.
All right, thanks very much, Gary. Good to have you here.
My pleasure.
We take a break next.
Well, that's good. That sounds good. Welcome back. It is 43 past the hour. If you are like most people, New Year's means time to make resolutions. Not necessarily to stick to them, but who doesn't resolve every year to improve their finances? But how do you ensure that the good intentions of January 1st turn into real savings by year end? Well, in this morning's The Buck Starts Here. Gary Belsky of Money Magazine joins us with some advice. Gary, good to have you here.
Good to be here.
And you were just saying to me that these are things you've done yourself.
Yeah, I try to. I don't want to be a hypocrite in giving personal finance advice and not following it, so I try to stick with the things that I say.
Is one of the key problems that we tend to be too vague when we try to make financial resolutions?
Well, actually, no. The problem is that people try to be too specific with their financial resolutions, and they don't keep any of them. It's one of the first thing that I try to tell people to do is to sort of determine their goals and expenses. And what I like to say, I have a poem. It's budget if you can, but at least make a plan. And what I mean by that is most people try to sit down and they just get overwhelmed by the process of budgeting. So if you just sit down and evaluate a few goals, what you want to do this year, how much you want to save for your college, or how much you want to save for a car, or how much you want to save for your retirement, and then look at your expenses over the course of the year and see whether or not they match up. For most people, they won't match up. If they do, good for you. But if they don't, there are ways that you can free up some money during the course of the year. One is, and I'm sorry I'm talking
That's okay. No, I was
lot to
just,
say.
it seems to make sense, and to be a little bit more vague gives you...
Well, if you don't bite off too much, then you're more likely to accomplish the goals that you want. One thing that people can do if they need to free up money quickly is to raise their insurance deductibles. Most people overestimate the likelihood that they'll have to make a claim. For example, most people only make a claim on their homeowner's policy once every 10 years. But because they're afraid of those big, big expenses, they have very low deductibles. If you raise your deductible from, let's say, $100 or $250 to $500 or $1,000, you can cut your premiums by 15 to 30%. When you look at that over car, home, and health, that's a lot of money.
That was one of your tips that I thought maybe people would have a nervous stomach about, because they think they're they're playing with their own safety, but it does tend to make sense given the amount of times we actually cash in those.
And more importantly, over the course of the 10 years that or the 9 years that you're not going to make that claim, you're going to be saving a lot of money. The worst thing, you could just put it into the savings account and save it, and then you can always make up that. If you have a big expense, you'll have money, in the bank to pay for it.
Now, the other tip you had that I thought might surprise people is to pay credit card debt with your emergency savings.
Yes, it sounds reckless, but it's not. First, the math. Most people have about $7,000 on credit card balances if they carry balances, but they also have several $1,000s in savings. Here's the deal. For every $1,000 you have in credit card expenses, it costs you about $180 a year in interest, 18%. For every $1,000 you have in the bank, at the most you're getting 5%. That's $50 a year. For every $1,000 you pay off from your savings, you save about $130 a year in interest expense. Now people will say, well, what about if I have an emergency or I get laid off my job? What I always say is, the credit card companies, believe me, if you lose your job or you have to buy a new refrigerator, my sister just had to buy a new furnace, they'll let you charge on your credit card.
Yeah, right.
That can be your emergency savings.
That's a good thought. Gary Belsky, thanks so much. Some tips for getting our financial houses in order from Money Magazine. Happy New Year to you. Good to have you here. From royalty to Hollywood royalty, from saints to singers, the people who made 1997 unforgettable, when Good Morning America continues.
Good morning.
Welcome back, 44 past the hour. As you may have heard, when the millennium rolls around, millions of computers that control everything from ATMs to maybe your insurance records to traffic lights may run into serious problems. Experts estimate U.S. companies will spend nearly $500 billion, that's with a T, trillion dollars, reprogramming computers for the year 2000. But many firms haven't even started dealing with what's being called the Y2K problem. And the buck starts here this morning. Money Magazine's Gary Belsky is here to help steer us clear of potential pitfalls. The Y2K.
The Y2K problem, the millennium bug.
Why to worry, Gary?
Well, the problem, of course, is that a lot of computer systems aren't capable of handling a very simple idea, which is the fact that dates on computer systems are registered in 2 digits, not 4. So instead of the year 2000 being 2000, it's registered as 00. The problem is a lot of computers see that as 1900.
Sure, and this was done back when memory
was very expensive.
So
Exactly.
they thought, well, we'll save those 2 extra digits, and somebody will come up with some great magic pill
The
down
silver
the road.
bullet,
Right,
exactly.
It didn't
And
happen. Yeah.
fortunately, nobody's come up with it. There are solutions now, but the solutions are very labor intensive. It requires millions and millions of dollars and millions of hours of going through computer coding.
Let's go down a couple of specific categories for consumers. Credit cards. If you have a credit card, for example, with an expiration date of 2000, should you be worried?
Yeah, there's a chance. There's been reports where you go in, they put it into the terminal at a store, and not only does it not register, it kills the terminal, it knocks out all the cash registers for the entire store. That's why we tell people that it's wise for them to keep...
Sure, you laugh now. It didn't happen to you.
That's why you better keep
right.
a credit card with you that has 1999 or 1998 as the expiration date in case the system freezes. You want to still be able to charge. So when you start getting those 2000 credit card expiration dates, keep an earlier date with you.
Good advice. Now, bank or credit union, what about that?
The issue, of course, is that the larger banks, Citibank, MBNA, Chase, they're well ahead of the curve in fixing this. But a lot of smaller local banks don't have the money or resources to be as into the game as they should. Right now, that's okay, but over the course of this year, if they don't figure it out, you have to check with your bank, ask them what their year 2000 plan is, what their Y2K plan is, and if they don't have a good answer, and you notice in the papers that there's a lot of reports about a bank not being up to speed, you might want to take your money from a local bank and put it into a national bank.
The first thing they say is, what's Y2K?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, get right down there. What about your brokerage account, mutual funds, things like that?
Same thing. The smaller brokerage firms are not as up to speed as the larger wirehouses, you know, Merrill Lynch, Prudential, et cetera. But also there's an issue as an investor. You have to be concerned about whether or not a company has dealt with this problem so that when the year 2000 rolls along, their computers work, so that so that their systems don't get messed up and their profits don't suffer.
Before we came on the air, I was asking Gary about some other stuff I had read, and it was about the potential for a recession because of this, and the thought that bonds, the interest rate would be down as low as 3%, and the yield would be over 20%. And your response?
Well, my response was that if you line up every economist in the world end to end, they still wouldn't reach a conclusion. Meaning that there's a lot of speculation about how this will play out in the economy. It's just unclear because right now there's a lot of companies that aren't up to speed, but there's a good chance that over the next year or 2 years, with so much scrutiny, that a lot of these problems will be fixed. So I don't want people to panic too much.
But you should take the offensive and at least find out where your credit card companies, banks, et cetera,
insurance companies, et cetera. Keep an eye on the paper. Talk to regulators. Talk to your banks. Make sure you ask the questions. And if things don't get answered, do what you have to do. Switch.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Next, a guided tour of one of the most...
Charlie Gibson is so happy about the new tax law, he may splurge and buy Mickey D's for everybody just a little bit later on. Gary Belsky from Money Magazine is here to tell you your good news. Lots of new tax laws, and they really are good for a change. They actually mean something to a lot of people.
Yes, they do, although I'm not signing Charlie's tax return, by the way. One of the significant changes of the Taxpayer Relief Act of 1997 is to expand IRA options, individual retirement account options, for most of Americans. 90% of Americans now are eligible to make deductible contributions to IRAs. But they may not want to because of the first thing I want to talk about, which is the Roth IRA. That's the new IRA that everyone's heard about. Basically, the deal is it allows you to make contributions to an IRA. You can't deduct them up to $2,000 a year. You can't deduct them from your current income, but if you hold the money in the IRA for 5 years and you take the money out after 59 and a half, you don't pay any taxes.
Wow.
No federal taxes and most likely no state taxes. So it's a great savings vehicle for most people.
So no income tax on that. Capital gains.
Well, actually, I want to talk about, there's one other IRA I need to talk
okay.
about, the IRA issue, which is the fact that the phase-out limits for the deductibility of IRAs for people who have retirement plans at work, like a 401k, have been raised. For a married couple, they used to be $40,000 to $50,000. Now it's $50,000 to $60,000. And for an individual, it used to be $25,000 to $30,000. Now the phase-out limit for when you can deduct an IRA goes from $30,000 to $40,000. So more people can take deductions, even if they have a retirement plan at work.
Oh, good. Okay. And then the capital gains tax?
Capital gains tax the top rate has gone from 28% for long-term capital gains to 20%, and the lower rate has gone from 15% to 10%, but they've redefined what a long-term capital gain is. Now you have to hold the stock for at least 18 months. It used to be just for a year. Now you have to hold it for at least 18 months.
All right, home sales. It used to be that people really got nailed if they sold their house for more than they paid and they weren't stepping up to a more expensive house.
Exactly. Now for a married couple, you can book as much as $500,000, $500,000 in capital gains, and you don't have to pay any taxes as long as you don't sell a home more than once every 2 years.
So they want you flipping.
They don't want you flipping, but basically most people shouldn't have to pay capital gains on most capital gains tax on most home sale
That's
profits.
terrific for empty nesters.
Exactly. They can trade down now without having to worry.
Right, exactly. And for people who want to do their own taxes quickly, you have some new products for us?
On computers, two we like is TurboTax Deluxe and Kiplinger's Tax Cut. They're very good. I do my own taxes. I use books. Ernst & Young's 1998 Tax Guide. American Express has a tax guide that's very good. J.K. Lasser has a tax guide that's very good. And there's a new one called Taxes for Busy People. I use a combination of two, and that usually solves all your problems.
We know we had to go so fast today, so people can contact us through the internet and get all this information. Thanks a lot, Gary.
My pleasure, as always.
Good news for lots of people. abcnews.com if you're there at home with the computer and you want the details on the products or the advice. Next, from Girls with